I sat in the luxury conference room at Pinnacle Solutions headquarters in Austin, Texas, staring at my father as he slid a loan agreement across the mahogany table. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he pushed the documents toward me, his voice barely above a whisper when he said those words that would have meant everything to me 10 years ago. "Please, Heath, we need $7 million to save the company." The irony burned through my chest like acid. This was the same man who had called me worthless, a dreamer, a failure, who would never amount to anything without his guidance. The same man who had kicked me out at 18 for choosing art school over business. I remembered sleeping in my beaten Honda Civic in this very parking lot a decade ago, watching the lights in these offices through rain-streaked windows, never imagining that one day I would be sitting inside as their only hope for survival. 10 years earlier, on my 18th birthday, I thought I was finally going to receive the support every child dreams of from their parents. Instead, Robert and Margaret made it crystal clear that my future meant nothing to them if it didn't align with their vision. They owned Pinnacle Solutions, a mid-sized software development company that seemed to be thriving in the competitive Austin tech scene. Their expectation was simple: I would study business, join the company after college, and eventually take over the family enterprise. When I announced my acceptance to the Art Institute of Austin, with a partial scholarship for digital design, the explosion was immediate and devastating. Robert's face turned crimson as he slammed his coffee mug down on the breakfast table, sending ceramic shards across the kitchen floor. "Art school. Are you completely out of your mind, Heath? You want to throw away everything we've built here for some ridiculous fantasy about being an artist?" Margaret's reaction was somehow worse than his anger. She looked at me with complete disappointment, as if I had personally betrayed everything she believed in. "We raised you better than this," she said, her voice cold and measured. "We gave you every advantage, every opportunity to succeed in the real world, and this is how you repay us, by choosing to be a starving artist." The fight escalated quickly from disappointment to ultimatums. They demanded I decline the art school acceptance and enroll in the University of Texas business program instead. When I refused, they called me ungrateful, selfish, and completely naive about how the world actually worked. Robert told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and that I would come crawling back within a year, begging for their help. "You want to be independent so badly?" Margaret asked, her arms crossed and her expression stone cold. "Fine. Pack your bags. If you're adult enough to make these kinds of decisions against our advice, then you're adult enough to live with the consequences completely on your own." They gave me exactly 24 hours to gather my belongings and leave. No financial support, no family car, no safety net of any kind. As I loaded my few possessions into my aging Honda Civic, Robert delivered his final blow. "Don't come crying to us when reality hits, Heath. You've made your choice, and now you'll live with it. You're not our son anymore until you come to your senses." The first months were brutal beyond anything I could have imagined. I worked 3 different jobs just to afford a tiny studio apartment in one of Austin's rougher neighborhoods. During the day, I attended classes at the Art Institute. In the evenings, I delivered pizza for a local restaurant. Late at night, I stocked shelves at a 24-hour grocery store. On weekends, I cleaned office buildings downtown. There were nights when I ate nothing but ramen noodles for weeks straight because that was all I could afford after paying rent and buying art supplies. I lost 20 pounds during my first semester, and my clothes hung loose on my increasingly thin frame. The physical exhaustion was overwhelming, but the emotional isolation was even worse. Watching other students get care packages from home or having their parents visit for lunch while I struggled alone created a constant ache in my chest. During this period, my parents seemed to be thriving without me. Pinnacle Solutions appeared more successful than ever. They purchased a stunning mansion in the hills overlooking Lake Austin, complete with a swimming pool and panoramic views of the city skyline. Robert bought himself a new BMW sedan, and Margaret started driving a luxury SUV. Their social media accounts were filled with photos from business conferences, expensive vacations, and company celebrations. My younger sister Jessica excelled in their eyes by joining Pinnacle Solutions immediately after graduating from the University of Texas with a business degree. The photos of her promotion celebrations and company achievements that I saw online felt like daggers through my heart. She seemed to effortlessly slide into the role that had been intended for me, earning the praise and recognition I had always craved from our parents. Meanwhile, I slowly began to discover something unexpected about myself. Despite the financial struggles and emotional pain, I found that I had a genuine talent for digital art and graphic design. My professors recognized my abilities early and began connecting me with freelance opportunities. Small projects at first, designing logos for local restaurants, creating flyers for community events, building simple websites for small businesses. Each successful project built my confidence and skills. I learned advanced software programs on my own time, watching tutorial videos late into the night after my other jobs were finished. Gradually, I began attracting larger clients, including some established advertising agencies and growing tech startups in Austin's booming technology sector. But the breakthrough that changed everything happened through my childhood friend Danny, who now worked as an accountant for several local businesses. We met for coffee one afternoon to catch up, and I mentioned how well Pinnacle Solutions seemed to be doing based on what I saw online and heard around town. Danny's expression grew uncomfortable, and he glanced around the coffee shop before leaning forward. "Heath, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I think you deserve to know the truth about your family's situation." My stomach dropped as he explained that one of his clients had considered partnering with Pinnacle Solutions the previous year. During the due diligence process, they had discovered that Robert and Margaret's company was hemorrhaging money and had been for nearly 3 years. The luxury lifestyle, the expensive cars, the beautiful house, all of it was financed through increasingly desperate loans and credit arrangements. "Your parents have been living completely beyond their means," Danny said quietly. "The company's revenue has been declining steadily, but they've been borrowing against future projections that were completely unrealistic. From what I could see, they were already in serious financial trouble even back then." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Everything I had believed about my parents' success was a carefully constructed illusion. They had rejected me for pursuing an uncertain path, while they themselves were building their lives on a foundation of debt and false projections. The hypocrisy was staggering, but what hurt even more was realizing that their criticism of my choices came from people who were making far worse financial decisions than anything I could have imagined. As Danny's words sank in, I felt a mixture of vindication and renewed pain. I had been struggling and sacrificing to build something real and sustainable, while my parents had been living a lie and calling me the failure. Over the next several years, my determination to prove them wrong became the fuel for my success. After mastering digital design fundamentals, I expanded into creating innovative mobile applications and developing comprehensive digital marketing solutions for growing businesses. My breakthrough came when I created a social media management app that streamlined content creation and scheduling for small businesses. The app, which I called ConnectFlow, solved a real problem that I had experienced firsthand while managing social media accounts for my freelance clients. Small business owners were drowning in the complexity of maintaining consistent online presence across multiple platforms, and existing solutions were either too expensive or too complicated for their needs. I spent 18 months developing ConnectFlow in my spare time, learning programming languages and user interface design through online courses and relentless practice. The app's clean interface and affordable pricing structure quickly attracted attention from entrepreneurs across Texas and beyond. When a major corporation approached me with an acquisition offer of $12 million at age 26, I could hardly believe what was happening. The negotiation process took 3 months, during which I learned about corporate law, intellectual property rights, and business valuations. The final agreement not only provided immediate financial security, but also included ongoing royalties and consulting opportunities. Instead of celebrating with expensive purchases or lifestyle inflation, I invested the majority of the windfall wisely. I put money into Austin real estate during a market dip, diversified into cryptocurrency during its early adoption phase, and created a portfolio of index funds and municipal bonds. By age 28, my net worth had grown to over $20 million through careful investment and continued business ventures. Despite this remarkable financial success, the emotional cost of family estrangement remained devastating. I had achieved everything my parents claimed to value: financial independence, business acumen, and professional recognition. But I had no one to share these accomplishments with. Major milestones felt hollow without family acknowledgement or celebration. Jessica had made occasional attempts to reach out over the years, sending text messages on my birthday or during holidays. I usually responded politely but briefly, unsure how to navigate a relationship with someone who represented the family that had rejected me. Part of me longed for connection, but a larger part remained too hurt and proud to risk further emotional damage. The loneliness became particularly acute during successful moments. When business magazines featured articles about young entrepreneurs, when I spoke at technology conferences, or when I closed major investment deals, I would find myself wondering if my parents had seen the coverage and whether they felt any regret about their treatment of me. That emotional isolation made Jessica's unexpected phone call even more shocking. It was a Tuesday evening in March, and I was reviewing quarterly investment reports in my downtown Austin penthouse when my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual enough, but her voice when I answered was something I had never heard before: desperate, terrified, and completely broken. "Heath, I need to tell you something," she sobbed, barely able to get the words out between crying. "I've been sick for 2 years and I didn't know how to reach out. I have leukemia and the treatment costs are destroying us financially." My first instinct was shock, followed immediately by concern that overrode years of family resentment. "Jessica, what are you talking about? 2 years. Why didn't anyone tell me?" Through her tears, she explained that she had been diagnosed during a routine checkup that revealed abnormal blood work. The cancer was aggressive, but treatable with the right medical intervention. However, the treatment protocol required specialized medications and procedures that were only partially covered by insurance. "The total cost is approaching $500,000, she continued. "But here's the strange thing, Heath. Someone has been anonymously paying a huge portion of my medical bills through a charity fund at the hospital. The payment started about a year ago, and no one knows who's behind it." My mind immediately went to the most logical explanation. "Have you asked Robert and Margaret if they're making the payments? They swear they don't know anything about it," Jessica replied. "And honestly, based on what I've seen of their financial situation, I don't think they have that kind of money available. The company has been struggling, and they've been stressed about money constantly." After ending the call with Jessica, I couldn't shake the mystery of the anonymous payments. Something about the timing and methodology seemed familiar, so I decided to investigate. I contacted Marcus, my former business partner, who had helped with the Connect Flow development and had remained a close friend despite our business relationship ending amicably. When I explained the situation to Marcus, his reaction was immediate and telling. He became visibly uncomfortable and avoided making eye contact. After several minutes of gentle questioning, he finally broke down and admitted the truth. "I couldn't watch your sister suffer when you had the resources to help," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I know how much family means to you, even though you've been hurt by them. About a year ago, I set up a charity fund and started making anonymous donations using money from our shared investment account." I was stunned. Marcus had been secretly using my money to pay for Jessica's medical treatment, without telling me, believing that I would want to help, but might be too proud or hurt to do so directly. He had been making payments of several $1,000s each month, significantly reducing the financial burden on my family. Your parents have no idea the money is coming from you, Marcus continued. They think it's from some kind of general hospital assistance program. Jessica doesn't know either. I thought it was better that way, given the complicated family situation. The revelation forced me to confront feelings I had been suppressing for years. Despite my anger and hurt, I did care about Jessica's well-being. Learning that she was facing a life-threatening illness, while I had been living in luxury, created a profound sense of guilt and responsibility. Marcus also revealed additional information that Jessica hadn't mentioned during our phone call. The anonymous medical payments were substantial, but they weren't covering everything. Robert and Margaret were still facing enormous out-of-pocket expenses for Jessica's treatment, and these costs were contributing to their business's financial crisis. Your parents are drowning Heath, Marcus said. The medical bills combined with their company's existing problems are pushing them toward complete financial collapse. They're too proud to ask for help, but they're desperate. This information completely reframed my understanding of my family's situation. They weren't just facing business difficulties due to poor management. They were also dealing with a medical crisis that would challenge any family's resources. The knowledge that I had been unknowingly helping while they struggled created a complex mixture of emotions that I wasn't prepared to handle. 3 days after my conversation with Marcus, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in almost 10 years. Robert's name appeared on the screen and my hands actually trembled as I considered whether to answer. When I finally did, his voice was barely recognizable, strained, exhausted, and completely stripped of the authoritative tone I remembered from my childhood. "Heath," he said, and I could hear him swallowing hard before continuing. "I know I have no right to call you after everything that happened, but I need to ask you for something. Could you meet with your mother and me? Please. It's about the company." The desperation in his voice was so complete that I found myself agreeing before I had time to think through the implications. We arranged to meet at Pinnacle Solutions offices the following afternoon, which would be my first time setting foot in the building since the day they had kicked me out. Driving through Austin toward their headquarters, I was struck by how much the city had changed during my decade of estrangement. New high-rise buildings dominated the skyline. Luxury apartment complexes had replaced older neighborhoods, and the traffic reflected the massive population growth that had transformed Austin into a major metropolitan area. When I arrived at Pinnacle Solutions, the changes were immediately obvious and devastating. The building that had once bustled with activity was now half empty, with multiple "for lease" signs posted on windows throughout the complex. The parking lot, which I remembered being completely full during business hours, now contained only a handful of cars scattered across the vast asphalt expanse. The lobby area that had once impressed visitors with marble floors and expensive furniture now looked tired and dated. The reception desk was unmanned, and several of the overhead lights had burned out without being replaced. The overall atmosphere felt like a business in its final stages of decline. Robert met me at the elevator, and the change in his appearance was shocking. He had aged dramatically since I last saw him, with deep lines around his eyes and gray hair that had thinned significantly. He wore an expensive suit that seemed too large for his frame, as if he had lost considerable weight. Most telling were his hands, which shook slightly as he pressed the elevator button. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly as we rode up to the executive floor. "I wasn't sure you would." Margaret was waiting in the conference room, and her transformation was equally dramatic. The confident, imposing woman I remembered had been replaced by someone who looked fragile and defeated. Her hair was styled differently, shorter and simpler, and she wore minimal makeup compared to the polished appearance she had always maintained. The conference room itself told the story of their decline. The expensive artwork that had once adorned the walls was gone, leaving behind faded rectangles on the paint where frames had previously hung. The large conference table remained, but several of the ergonomic chairs had been removed, creating an oddly sparse feeling in the previously impressive space. Robert gestured for me to sit across from them, and I noticed how he and Margaret exchanged glances before he began speaking. Their body language suggested they had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, trying to find the right words to explain their situation without completely destroying their remaining dignity. "Heath, I'm going to be completely honest with you about our situation." Robert began, his voice steady but strained. "Pinnacle Solutions is facing bankruptcy. We have exactly 72 hours to secure $7 million in funding, or we're going to lose everything: the company, our home, and all the employees who still work here." Margaret picked up where he left off, her voice barely above a whisper. "We know we hurt you terribly 10 years ago. We know we said things that were unforgivable, and that we threw you out when you needed our support the most. But you're the only person we know who might have the resources to help us." They went on to explain the complex financial situation in more detail. A major client had filed a lawsuit alleging that Pinnacle Solutions had failed to deliver a software system according to specifications, resulting in significant business losses. The lawsuit sought damages of $15 million, but even defending against it was costing hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Additionally, they had made several bad investments in cryptocurrency and real estate during the previous 3 years, believing that diversifying their business portfolio would provide additional security. Instead, market downturns had wiped out nearly $2 million of company capital. The final blow had come from the economic disruption caused by recent market changes, which had caused several major clients to cancel long-term contracts. The combination of lost revenue, legal expenses, and bad investments had created a perfect storm of financial disaster. "We used our house as collateral for emergency loans," Margaret admitted, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "If we can't make this payment, we'll lose our home and the company simultaneously." Robert slid a loan agreement across the table toward me, along with a detailed business plan for restructuring Pinnacle Solutions. "We're offering you 8% annual interest on a $7 million loan with full repayment guaranteed within 5 years. We'll give you a security interest in all company assets and personal guarantees from both of us." As they spoke, I found myself studying their faces and body language, searching for signs of the manipulation and emotional abuse I had experienced years earlier. Instead, I saw genuine fear, desperation, and what appeared to be authentic remorse for their past behavior. Margaret broke down, completely sobbing as she tried to speak. "We were wrong about everything, Heath. We were wrong about you, wrong about your potential, wrong about what success actually means. You've accomplished more than we ever did, and we threw you away because we were too stubborn and prideful to see your talent." Robert nodded, his own eyes filling with tears. "We know we don't deserve your help. We know we destroyed our relationship with you through our own actions. But if there's any part of you that can forgive us, we're begging you to consider this loan. Not for us, but for the 23 employees who will lose their jobs if the company fails." The emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming. These were the people who had caused me years of pain and struggle, but they were also my parents, sitting broken and desperate in front of me. Part of me felt vindicated, seeing them forced to acknowledge their mistakes and ask for my help. Another part felt genuine sadness, watching the destruction of people I had once loved deeply. Just as I was beginning to process the complexity of emotions involved in their request, my phone buzzed with a text message from Kyle, a business associate I had worked with during my early freelance years. The timing seemed insignificant at first, just a routine message from someone I hadn't heard from in months. The message read, "Heath, I was going through old files for a client project and found something disturbing. I think you need to see these emails from about 10 years ago. They involve your father and some business dealings that affected you. Attached to the message were screenshots of email exchanges between Robert and several potential clients I had tried to work with during my early struggles as a freelance designer. The emails were dated from my first year out of high school, when I was desperately trying to build a client base while working multiple jobs to survive. As I read through the messages, my blood ran cold. Robert had systematically contacted business owners who had inquired about my services, warning them that I was completely inexperienced and unreliable, and that they would be making a serious mistake by hiring me for their projects. One email particularly stood out. "I'm writing as Heath's father to warn you that my son is not ready for professional work. He's young, inexperienced, and frankly not mature enough to handle business responsibilities. I'd strongly recommend finding a more established designer for your project." Another message was even more damaging. "Heath is going through a rebellious phase and making poor decisions about his career. As his father, I can tell you that he's not someone you can count on to deliver quality work or meet deadlines. I'd hate to see your business suffer because of his immaturity." The realization hit me like a physical blow. My early business struggles hadn't been due solely to my inexperience or the competitive market. My own father had been actively sabotaging my efforts contacting potential clients to destroy my reputation before I even had a chance to prove myself. Looking up from my phone, I saw Robert and Margaret watching me expectantly, clearly hoping I was reading something that would help them with their current crisis. Instead, I was discovering evidence of a betrayal that went far deeper than I had ever imagined. "Did you contact my potential clients 10 years ago to warn them not to hire me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Robert's face went completely white, and Margaret gasped audibly. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Margaret's quiet sobbing and the distant hum of office air conditioning. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice barely audible. "Heath, I can explain." I left their offices without signing anything, my mind reeling from the discovery of Robert's sabotage. The drive back to my penthouse was a blur of conflicted emotions. Rage at the betrayal, vindication that my early struggles weren't entirely my fault, and confusion about how to process this new information in light of their current desperation. Unable to make an immediate decision that would affect so many lives, I decided to conduct a thorough investigation of Pinnacle Solutions before determining my next steps. If I was going to get involved in any capacity, I needed to understand exactly what I would be dealing with and whether there were additional secrets that could complicate the situation further. I hired Patricia, a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud and financial crimes. Her reputation in Austin business circles was impeccable, and she had helped several of my acquaintances uncover embezzlement and other financial irregularities in their companies. If there were hidden problems at Pinnacle Solutions, beyond what Robert and Margaret had admitted, Patricia would find them. Patricia's initial report arrived within a week, and it painted a picture that was even worse than I had anticipated. The financial mismanagement at Pinnacle Solutions wasn't just a matter of bad luck or poor business decisions. It showed a pattern of questionable practices that bordered on fraudulent behavior. According to Patricia's findings, Robert had been systematically inflating company revenues in reports to investors and lenders for at least 4 years. He had created fictitious contracts and projected earnings that had no basis in reality, using these fabricated numbers to secure loans and credit lines that the company could never realistically repay. The practice had started small, with minor exaggerations of existing contracts to make quarterly reports look more favorable. Over time, however, the lies had grown more elaborate and extensive. By the previous year, nearly 30% of the reported revenue came from completely fictional business deals that existed only on paper. Even more disturbing was evidence that Robert had been diverting money from employee retirement accounts to cover operating expenses and maintain the company's day-to-day operations. The retirement fund, which should have contained over $800,000 in employee contributions, had been reduced to less than $50,000 through a series of unauthorized loans that were never repaid. Patricia also uncovered evidence of expense account abuse that showed Robert and Margaret had been using company funds for personal expenses, including their mortgage payments, car loans, and even vacation costs. They had categorized these expenses as business development and client entertainment. But the documentation clearly showed they were personal in nature. The investigation revealed that Jessica had been working without pay for the past 8 months, believing her parents' claims that temporary salary deferrals would help the company through a difficult period. In reality, Jessica was providing free labor while Robert and Margaret continued to pay themselves full salaries and benefits. Patricia's research also uncovered information about Jessica's living situation that broke my heart. While Robert and Margaret maintained their expensive lifestyle in the hills above Austin, Jessica had moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a modest neighborhood to reduce her expenses during her cancer treatment. She was driving a 15-year-old sedan while her parents continued using luxury vehicles that were financed through company accounts. The most shocking discovery came when Patricia investigated the origins of Pinnacle Solutions' most successful product line. Through patent filings, business records, and interviews with former employees, she uncovered evidence that the company's flagship project management software was based entirely on concepts I had shared during a family dinner conversation when I was 17 years old. I remembered that evening clearly now. It had been during my senior year of high school, and I was working on a computer science project that involved designing a simple task management system. I had been excited about the possibilities and had spent the entire dinner explaining my ideas for how such a system could be expanded and improved for business use. Robert had dismissed my concepts as interesting but impractical, at the time questioning whether teenagers really understood the complexities of business operations. I had felt deflated by his response and had abandoned the project to focus on other assignments. According to Patricia's research, Robert had filed a patent application for a comprehensive project management and workflow system just 6 months after that conversation. The patent filing listed him as the sole inventor despite the fact that every major component of the system had been based on ideas I had outlined during our dinner discussion. That software had become Pinnacle Solutions' most profitable product line, generating over $4 million in revenue during the past decade. The success of that product had funded the expensive lifestyle that Robert and Margaret had maintained, while calling me a failure and a dreamer. The realization that my own creative ideas had been funding their lifestyle, while they sabotaged my early business efforts, was devastating. It represented a level of betrayal that went beyond emotional abuse into actual theft of intellectual property that had generated substantial financial gains. Patricia's final report also included information about several former employees who had been illegally terminated when they raised questions about the company's financial practices. 3 employees had been fired after expressing concerns about irregularities in the retirement fund, and 2 others had been dismissed when they questioned expense account documentation. All of these former employees were potentially valuable witnesses if legal action became necessary. Several had indicated they would be willing to testify about what they had observed, particularly regarding the retirement fund diversions and the fictitious revenue reports. Armed with this comprehensive evidence of systematic fraud and financial mismanagement, I faced a decision that would determine not only my parents' future, but also the fate of the innocent employees and my relationship with Jessica, who appeared to be as much a victim of our parents' deception as anyone else. The investigation had revealed that this wasn't simply a case of a struggling business needing temporary assistance. Pinnacle Solutions was a fundamentally corrupt organization that had been built on lies, theft, and financial manipulation. Providing a loan would essentially be enabling criminal behavior and could even make me complicit in ongoing fraud. However, the complexity of the situation meant that simply walking away wasn't a satisfactory solution either. 23 employees would lose their jobs and potentially their retirement savings if the company collapsed. Jessica's medical situation added another layer of moral complexity, as did the question of whether there might be a way to restructure the situation to serve justice while protecting innocent parties. The evidence also raised serious legal questions about my parents' potential criminal liability. The retirement fund diversions alone constituted federal crimes that could result in significant prison sentences, and the pattern of investor fraud could trigger additional federal charges with even more severe consequences. After reviewing Patricia's comprehensive report, I realized that a simple yes or no response to my parents' loan request would be inadequate for the complex situation I was facing. Instead, I needed to develop a strategic approach that would address the criminal behavior, protect innocent parties, and potentially transform this disaster into something positive. I assembled a team of professionals to help me structure a comprehensive solution. Samuel, a business attorney who specialized in corporate restructuring and white-collar crime, would handle the legal aspects of any plan we developed. Patricia would continue her investigative work to ensure we had uncovered all relevant information. Rachel, a forensic accountant with experience in fraud cases, would help analyze the financial records and develop a restructuring plan that could restore the company to legitimate operations. My initial concept was to completely acquire Pinnacle Solutions rather than simply providing a loan. This approach would give me control over the company's operations and allow me to implement the changes necessary to operate ethically while protecting employee jobs. It would also position me to cooperate with federal authorities in addressing the criminal aspects of Robert and Margaret's behavior. Samuel explained that an acquisition strategy would be complex but achievable. I could offer to purchase the company for a nominal amount, essentially taking over all assets and liabilities, while requiring Robert and Margaret to cooperate fully with authorities as part of the agreement. This approach would allow them to potentially negotiate plea agreements rather than facing the full prosecution that would likely result from a federal investigation. The employee protection aspects of this plan were particularly important to me. Rachel's analysis showed that the company's core operations were fundamentally sound despite the financial mismanagement. With proper leadership and adequate capitalization, Pinnacle Solutions could be restored to profitability while providing good jobs for the remaining staff members. I also wanted to address Jessica's situation directly, rather than continuing the anonymous medical payments through Marcus. If I was going to restructure the entire family dynamic, it made sense to be open about my willingness to help with her medical expenses while also bringing her into the legitimate operation of the reformed company. Before implementing any plan, however, I needed to have a direct conversation with Jessica to understand her perspective and determine whether she had been a willing participant in any of the fraudulent activities or was simply an innocent victim of our parents' deception. I contacted Jessica and suggested we meet for coffee at a neutral location where we could talk privately about the family situation. She agreed immediately, and her eagerness to connect suggested that she was as troubled by recent developments as I was. We met at a small coffee shop near the hospital where she received her cancer treatment. When I saw her walking toward our table, I was shocked by how thin and exhausted she appeared. The aggressive chemotherapy had taken a visible toll, but what struck me most was the resilience and determination in her expression, despite her physical challenges. "Heath, I'm so glad you're willing to talk with me," she said as she sat down. "I've been hoping for years that we could find a way to reconnect, but I wasn't sure how to bridge the gap after everything that happened." Our conversation began with her apologizing for not reaching out sooner and acknowledging the pain that Robert and Margaret had caused by throwing me out. Jessica admitted that she had always admired my independence and creativity, even when our parents were criticizing my choices. "I went along with the business school path because it seemed easier," she confessed. "But I always wondered what would have happened if I had been brave enough to follow my own interests the way you did." As we talked, I began to understand that Jessica had been as much a victim of our parents' manipulation as I had been, just in different ways. They had praised her for conforming to their expectations, while simultaneously taking advantage of her loyalty and work ethic to prop up their failing business. The conversation took a dramatic turn when Jessica nervously pulled out her phone and showed me a voice recording app that contained dozens of saved files. Her hands trembled slightly as she explained what I was looking at. "Heath, I started recording conversations with Robert and Margaret about 6 months ago," she said, glancing around the coffee shop to make sure we weren't being overheard. "At first, I was just trying to protect myself legally since I was working without pay and wanted documentation of our agreements." She played a few brief excerpts that revealed her parents discussing financial irregularities and strategies for hiding money from creditors. The recordings clearly demonstrated that Robert and Margaret were aware their business practices were questionable and were actively attempting to conceal evidence of their activities. But then I started hearing things that made me realize the situation was much worse than I had understood. Jessica continued. "They were talking about manipulating you emotionally to get money, and they were making really cruel comments about your success and their plans to take advantage of you." One recording particularly stood out. In it, Margaret could be heard laughing as she told Robert, "If Heath is stupid enough to give us money, we'll take it and never pay him back anyway. Because what's he going to do? Sue his own parents? We raised him so he owes us whatever we need." Another recording captured Robert saying, "Heath thinks he's so successful, but he's still just a naive kid who wants mommy and daddy's approval. We can use that weakness to solve our problems." The callousness in their voices was devastating to hear, but Jessica's courage in documenting these conversations showed a level of integrity and moral clarity that impressed me deeply. She had been in an impossible situation torn between family loyalty and recognition that serious wrongdoing was occurring. "Rena, I've also been in contact with some of the employees who were fired for asking questions about the company's finances," Jessica revealed. "They've been sharing information with me because they're concerned about their retirement funds and want someone inside the company to advocate for them." Jessica had essentially become a whistleblower within her own family, gathering evidence of criminal activity while dealing with her own health crisis and financial struggles. Her actions showed remarkable strength and moral courage under extremely difficult circumstances. "I don't want to see innocent people hurt by what Robert and Margaret have done," she said. "But I also don't want to be complicit in covering up criminal behavior. I've been hoping someone would be able to step in and find a way to fix this situation without destroying everyone involved." As I listened to Jessica's recordings and learned about her covert efforts to protect employees and gather evidence, I realized that she could be a crucial ally in implementing whatever solution I decided to pursue. Her inside knowledge and documented evidence would be invaluable in any restructuring effort or legal proceedings. More importantly, I understood that Jessica shared my values regarding integrity and accountability. Unlike Robert and Margaret, she was willing to face difficult truths and take personal risks to do the right thing. This realization opened the possibility of rebuilding our sibling relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and shared principles, rather than family obligation. I returned to Pinnacle Solutions 3 days later, armed with comprehensive evidence of my parents' criminal activities and a detailed restructuring proposal that would protect innocent parties while ensuring accountability for wrongdoing. Samuel accompanied me as my attorney, along with Patricia, who brought additional documentation we had gathered during the extended investigation. This time, the meeting would be entirely on my terms. Instead of responding to their desperate loan request, I was presenting them with an ultimatum that would force them to confront the full scope of their actions and their consequences. Robert and Margaret were waiting in the same conference room where our previous meeting had taken place, but the dynamic was completely different. They clearly sensed that something had changed in my demeanor, and their body language reflected anxiety about what I might have learned during the intervening days. "Before we discuss any financial arrangements," I began, "I need you to understand that I've conducted a thorough investigation of Pinnacle Solutions and your business practices over the past several years. I laid out a series of documents on the conference table. Bank records showing the retirement fund diversions, evidence of falsified revenue reports, documentation of expense account abuse, and copies of the patent filing that had stolen my intellectual property. As they realized the extent of what I had uncovered, their expressions shifted from hope to panic. Heath let me explain how things got to this point. Robert said, his voice already taking on a defensive tone. The business environment has been incredibly challenging, and we made some decisions that might not look good in hindsight, but our intentions were always to protect the company and the employees. Samuel interrupted before Robert could continue building a narrative of justification. Mr. Williams, I need to advise you that several of the activities documented in these records constitute federal crimes. Before this conversation continues, you should understand that anything you say could potentially be used as evidence in criminal proceedings. The color drained from Margaret's face as the legal implications became clear. Criminal proceedings? Heath, surely you're not planning to have your own parents arrested? I explained that the situation had moved far beyond personal family conflicts. The retirement fund diversions alone constituted federal embezzlement charges that carried potential prison sentences of up to 20 years. The investor fraud could trigger additional charges with equally severe consequences. However, I continued, I'm prepared to offer you an alternative to federal prosecution, but it requires complete cooperation and acceptance of my terms. I presented them with a buyout agreement that would transfer complete ownership of Pinnacle Solutions to me for $1, along with assumption of all legitimate company debts and legal liabilities. The agreement also required them to cooperate fully with authorities in addressing the criminal aspects of their behavior, and to accept whatever plea agreements federal prosecutors might offer. Robert's initial response was explosive anger. You're trying to steal the company we built. This is extortion, Heath. You're taking advantage of a temporary crisis to destroy everything we've worked for. The company you built on stolen ideas and fraudulent financial practices? I replied calmly, including software concepts that you stole from me when I was 17 years old and have been profiting from ever since. I played one of Jessica's recordings where Margaret could be heard laughing about their plans to manipulate me emotionally and never repay any money I might lend them. The sound of her own voice, expressing such callous intentions, seemed to break something inside Margaret, and she began sobbing uncontrollably. We never meant for things to go this far, she whispered. We just needed to keep the company alive long enough to turn things around. Samuel explained that accepting my buyout offer would allow them to potentially negotiate plea agreements that could result in reduced sentences and the possibility of serving time in minimum security facilities. Refusing the offer would likely result in full federal prosecution with much more severe consequences. The most devastating moment came when I revealed that I knew about their backup plan. While we had been talking, Patricia had been monitoring their financial accounts and had discovered that they had already transferred the remaining company funds to an offshore account in preparation for fleeing the country. Even now, facing the evidence of your crimes and the possibility of accountability, you were planning to run away and leave Jessica and your employees to deal with the consequences, I said, unable to keep the disgust out of my voice. My phone rang at that moment with a call from airport security at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Patricia had filed a financial fraud alert that morning, and Robert and Margaret's names had been flagged when they attempted to check in for an international flight scheduled to depart in 3 hours. Airport authorities had detained them for questioning when their names appeared on the federal watch list, discovering that they were carrying one-way tickets to a non-extradition country and cash amounts that exceeded legal reporting requirements for international travel. The revelation that my parents had been planning to abandon Jessica during her cancer treatment while fleeing from their crimes was the final blow to any remaining sympathy I might have felt for their situation. They had shown themselves to be completely without honor or basic human decency. You were going to leave your daughter to face her medical crisis alone, while you ran away to avoid responsibility for your crimes." I said, my voice filled with contempt. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character and your priorities." With their escape plan exposed and federal authorities already involved, Robert and Margaret had no choice but to accept my terms. The buyout agreement was signed that afternoon, transferring complete control of Pinnacle Solutions to me, along with responsibility for addressing the criminal activities and protecting innocent parties. Samuel coordinated with federal prosecutors to arrange surrender and plea negotiations that would allow Robert and Margaret to take responsibility for their crimes while potentially avoiding the maximum sentences they might otherwise face. Their cooperation in documenting the fraudulent activities and returning stolen funds would be factors in determining their final punishments. As they were led away by federal agents, Margaret made one final attempt to appeal to family loyalty. "Heath, we're still your parents. We love you, and we raised you to be better than this." My response was measured but final. "You raised me to value honesty, hard work, and integrity. I'm applying those values to this situation. If you had lived by those principles yourselves, we wouldn't be here today." 6 months after taking control of Pinnacle Solutions, I stood in the completely renovated headquarters, watching 23 employees collaborate on innovative projects in an environment that prioritized creativity, integrity, and mutual respect. The company, now renamed Phoenix Solutions, had not only recovered from its near collapse, but had actually become more profitable and efficient under ethical leadership. The transformation process had been challenging but deeply rewarding. My first priority was restoring the employee retirement fund that Robert and Margaret had embezzled, which required an immediate investment of $850,000 to make all affected employees whole. Seeing the relief and gratitude on their faces when they learned their retirement savings were secure was one of the most satisfying moments of the entire experience. I also implemented profit-sharing programs, comprehensive health benefits, and professional development opportunities that had never existed under my parents' leadership. The positive changes in company culture were immediately obvious, with employee satisfaction surveys showing dramatic improvements in morale and job security. Jessica's role in the company's renewal had been central to its success. After completing her cancer treatment successfully, she had proven to have exceptional talent for operations management and strategic planning. Her experiences as both an insider witness to the company's problems and a victim of our parents' manipulation gave her unique insights into preventing future issues while building positive workplace relationships. Our sibling relationship had grown stronger than it had ever been during our childhood. We communicated openly about the family trauma we had both experienced and worked together to create something positive from the wreckage of our parents' crimes. Jessica often told me that working together to rebuild Phoenix Solutions had been therapeutic for her during cancer recovery. Robert and Margaret ultimately pled guilty to multiple federal charges, including embezzlement, securities fraud, and tax evasion. Their cooperation in documenting the fraudulent activities and returning recovered funds resulted in reduced sentences, but they still faced significant prison time. Robert received 4 years in federal prison, while Margaret received 3 years due to her lesser role in the financial crimes. I had mixed emotions about their imprisonment. Part of me felt vindicated that they faced consequences for their actions, but another part simply felt sad about the waste of their lives and the destruction they had brought upon themselves and others. I visited them occasionally in prison, not out of forgiveness, but from a desire to maintain some form of family connection, and hope that they might eventually understand the impact of their choices. The visits were difficult conversations that often ended with them expressing resentment about the consequences they faced rather than genuine remorse for their actions. However, over time, I began to see small signs of recognition that their problems had been self-created, rather than the result of external circumstances or family betrayal. One of the most meaningful developments was the scholarship fund I established for young entrepreneurs who had been rejected or unsupported by their families. The fund provided both financial assistance and mentorship for individuals trying to build businesses while dealing with family estrangement or disapproval. Working with scholarship recipients reminded me of my own struggles as an 18-year-old trying to survive while pursuing my dreams against family opposition. Helping others navigate similar challenges provided a sense of purpose that transformed my own painful experiences into something constructive and healing. The scholarship program also connected me with other successful entrepreneurs who had overcome family rejection and built meaningful lives through determination and hard work. These relationships helped me understand that family dysfunction and rejection were more common than I had realized, and that many people had found ways to thrive despite early trauma and abandonment. Through therapy and reflection, I came to understand that my parents' treatment of me had been more about their own insecurities and limitations than about any actual deficiencies in my character or potential. Their need to control and diminish me had reflected their fear of being surpassed by their own child, rather than any genuine concern about my welfare. The process of rebuilding Phoenix Solutions and establishing the scholarship fund taught me the difference between revenge and justice. I could have simply refused to help when my parents approached me and watched them lose everything as a form of payback for their past treatment. That approach would have satisfied my anger, but would have harmed innocent people and left my own emotional wounds unresolved. Instead, I chose to transform the situation into something that served justice while protecting innocent parties and creating positive outcomes for everyone involved. The employees kept their jobs and recovered their stolen retirement funds. Jessica received the medical care she needed and found meaningful work that utilized her talents. Even Robert and Margaret, despite facing criminal consequences, were given opportunities for rehabilitation rather than simply being destroyed. The experience taught me that true success isn't about proving doubters wrong or accumulating wealth and recognition. Real success comes from maintaining your values and integrity even when others disappoint you, and from using whatever power you gain to create positive change rather than simply settling personal scores. Family relationships, I learned, can't be built on conditions, threats, or expectations of conformity. But they can sometimes be rebuilt through accountability, honest communication, and genuine change. The relationship I now had with Jessica was stronger than our childhood connection because it was based on mutual respect and shared values rather than family obligation. Most importantly, I discovered that the approval I had been seeking from my parents was less important than the self-respect that comes from handling adversity with wisdom and compassion. The pain of their rejection had ultimately made me stronger and more empathetic, qualities that served me well in business and in life. Phoenix Solutions now employed over 40 people and was expanding into new markets with innovative software products that solved real problems for small and medium-sized businesses. The company's success was built on ethical practices, transparent communication, and respect for all stakeholders, rather than the deception and exploitation that had characterized my parents' leadership. Last month, I received a letter from Maria, one of our scholarship recipients, who had used our funding and mentorship to launch a nonprofit organization that provides technology training for low-income families. Her letter described how our program had given her hope during a dark period when her own family had rejected her dreams of social entrepreneurship. Reading Maria's letter, I realized that the pain of my parents' rejection had ultimately led to something far more meaningful than family approval. The trauma I had experienced had taught me empathy for others facing similar challenges and had motivated me to create opportunities for people whose potential might otherwise be overlooked or dismissed. The story of my relationship with Robert and Margaret wasn't over, but it had reached a point of resolution that brought me peace. They were facing the consequences of their choices while being given opportunities for rehabilitation and growth. I had protected innocent parties while building something positive from the ashes of their betrayal. And I had learned that sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, but transforming their wrongdoing into motivation for positive change. Standing in the Phoenix Solutions offices, watching dedicated employees working on projects that would help other businesses succeed, I felt a sense of satisfaction that no amount of parental approval could have provided. I had found my own path, built something meaningful, and created opportunities for others to do the same. The young man who had been thrown out at 18 for choosing his own dreams had become someone who helped others pursue theirs. The pain of rejection had been transformed into the strength to lift others up. And the family business that had been built on lies and theft had become a company that operated with integrity and transparency. That transformation represented justice in its truest form, not punishment for its own sake, but the creation of something better from the wreckage of what came before. Have you ever faced a situation where family members who hurt you later needed your help? How did you handle the conflict between personal pain and family loyalty? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and building success despite difficult beginnings. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's possible to transform betrayal into triumph. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the strength to turn your own challenges into opportunities for growth and positive change.